Hello, can you feel the fatigue? Well, this is the very last part. If you've previously purchased the tutorial files on Gumroad, you will get this one, well, quote unquote for free on top. Obviously you have paid for it previously, but I will update the file so you don't have to worry about that. If you still want to purchase it, I urge you to do it now because I'm going to increase the price a little bit later, probably over the week. Because as I told previously, like for $1, most of it is going to paper on Gumroad and I don't see a whole lot of it. So, you know, for the sneaky viewers who catch this tutorial early, you can still get it cheaply. Yes, other than that, obviously if you're a patron, you get it anyways. You don't have to buy it on Gumroad. So, you know, check out my Patreon, by the way. I would like to have a couple more boys and girls up in there, but I digress. So, some people have messaged me about having differently sized building parts. Like my building has 2 meter by 2 meter elements and one has said something like 3.4 meter by 3.4 meter. There was a reason that I asked you to make it 1 meter by 1 meter, because these calculations really get tedious once you have to multiply not by nice values like 2 or 4, but 6.40 or some shit like that. So we can increase the size of the building very comfortably at the end here. And so I don't forget it, let's do it right now. Under geometry, you can get a transform node, plug it in at the very end. And well, how big do you reckon all the individual parts here are? I'd say, how high is like the ceiling? Like 250 or something? Let's be generous and say like one element here is like 3 meters high or something. So since we are speaking about 1 meter right now, we will make it 3 meters by 3 meters by 3 meters. So now our building has a reasonable size. I hope you're happy. Wasn't that much easier than trying to calculate everything at the front? Well, this is done. Another little bit of cleanup that I forgot. You might remember the selection input, which we used to punch out like the bottom middle. Well, I forgot to reconnect it in some previous part. I don't remember when, but this is easily fixed. So I'm going to take the selection and drag it down here and reconnect it to this bottom middle mask. Another little thing that I did off camera, you know, I did some mining off camera. Wow, good joke. I changed up these elements that we have here in a very slight degree, and it's just a cosmetic change, nothing more. This is the original collection as it was before, and you can see that there are these arches which are kind of wedged in the middle. It doesn't seem quite logical, so I moved the arches down to like the straight wall in the middle, and I made the ring really just a little bit more plain. It's really just a brick wall right now. And also I took the vertical gap part of this window wall and kind of made like a little extruded window here. That didn't change the logic. I didn't do anything in the geometry node setup itself, but I just wanted to make a couple changes. So let me show the building generator again, and we can now see the changes live. As I swap out the collection, now I have brick building modified, which I will select. As you can see, minor change. I just liked it better that way. I will also update the Gumroad file for the assets, so you can have the same change if you like, or you can just keep the old elements, whatever you prefer. Though you might have noticed that there are 3 new little parts that have appeared to the left here, which we will discuss shortly, but those are blank walls, which we'll use to make an entire section of a wall, like one entire side, into a blank brick wall. Buildings really often tend to have these blank walls, so thanks for the suggestion. I have inserted them in front of these awnings, so the awnings were previously elements 16 and 17, and now they have been pushed up to be 19 and 20. Just so you know, if you follow this tutorial part by part, that really doesn't matter for you though. Now, let's start. How would we turn an entire wall here blank? It's not that difficult. It's just a lot of nodes, again, as always. This is this kind of switch tree that we have. And as you remember, this is where we kind of designate the correct parts to the correct spots in this building. So if I take, for example, the first switch node and mute it with M, you can see, okay, this is the switch node that decides that a part is either a ground floor part or, well, anything else. Now I can take a switch node here and put it in front of this ground floor part. If we take a look back into this collection with our new blank corners, we can see that element 16, 17 and 18 are our blank walls. Let's, for example, set it to 16 now. and I could switch it up and almost get a complete straight wall right ahead. I don't really want to do all the work of then reassigning roof and ground floor parts, so I'm actually going to remove this switch node out of here. If I hold Alt and drag it out, it's getting removed essentially. So we've already established this is the ground floor. I'm going to keep the ground floor, so you're safe, you're good to go, ground floor. You can stay where you are. Now this next switch node is the roof. So this as well can stay. I'm glad you're here, roof, you can remain. That means that whatever goes into any of these switch nodes is probably all the rest that we need. So let's put the switch node in the upper section here and try it out. Yes, that was apparently the right choice. So this is where I put the switch and divert something in order to assign a blank wall. And I will take the roof as it is. And I mean, if you would like, you can also model a blank part for the ground floor, and you can deduct the logic on how to do that from what we're going to do right now. It's not really going to be a learn effect though, because we're going to do the same thing 10 times for every little element. So I'm just going to show you the theory now. So two things we have to do now. First of all, we have to make it that this switch only switches on and off one single wall and not all four, because we don't really want a building that is completely blank. And we have to feed something into this lower value, because we do not only need one blank wall, we also need to rebuild the corners, which we have essentially destroyed by kind of sneaking the switch node in here. I have created a corner. This is the part that connects to the floor, and the other one will be the part that connects to other walls that are not blank essentially. And since it's asymmetrical, we would need to either flip or rotate it using node logic, and I didn't want to bother with that, so I just created a copy of it and essentially scaled it and rotated it until it kind of fit my definition of a flipped corner. Well, you will see what I mean in a second. So we do know that we have to switch between corners and straight walls, so let's duplicate it and put in another switch node in the input, and I will set this to 17, which will be one of our blank corners. Right, now if I switch them, you can see that I can replace the straight walls with the corners. So what do we put in here? Well, we have at some point already found out where the corners are, so I could just go over here and take a look for this corners output from our masks node and drop it over here. Right now my true value is 16, which is my straight wall, but I'm feeding in this boolean which will return true where the corners are, so it's switched around. So actually here we should have the 17, and in the false value we should have the 16, right? Now this switch was the one where we switched between the old geometry and our blank wall, so we need to feed something in here that represents the wall. Well, what could we take? How about this node group there, which we created in, I think, the first or second part, which returns the wall. So let's take, for example, this plus X output that is free right now and put it into the switch. All of the other parts have returned to being normal, just this wall has remained. Due to the nature how we've set up this wall mask, as you remember, we always left out one corner and included one of the other corners in this particularly strange pattern that we have that is biting us in the back a little bit now, but that's fixed quite easily. Let's make a couple of new outputs in this walls node. So I will tap into the walls node, grab the outputs, bring up the panel with M, and just duplicate all of these outputs. Now we have to give them a different name for clarity's sake. I'm just going to call them _full. Now let's look at the first one. The plus X input comes from this end node, and this end node comes from this particular comparison node. So I'm going to take this and plug this here. The second end input comes from that one down here at the bottom. So this goes into the second input. Now in theory, if I tap out of here and instead of connecting this plus X input, connect this plus X full input, yes, this corner now also has an edge. This one has like this little element with these vertical pillars that make it appear, you know, kind of deliberate that this connection is here. And the other one doesn't have it. The other one is, well, essentially rotated and flipped in a way that these pillars are on the wrong side. In order to fix that, we would now have to rotate it 90 degrees along the z-axis, scale it by -1 and all of that. I just thought it's too complicated, so I just did this in the model. So we just have to select a different integer to get like this other mirrored version of the corner. So let's duplicate yet another switch node. Remember, the true value is the one that right now both corners are being fed into. So I'm going to connect this new switch node to the true value. And we've already learned that one of the corners is 17 and the other one is at spot 18. Here it is called 17-1, but it is, well, at index 18 of our collection. Now let's find out what we have to put in here. And that too is rather simple. Let's make a little bit of space over here. Now, luckily, we don't have to do quite a lot of calculation here. This original x value that we had beforehand, that was not the plus x full value that we just made, did not include this corner, if you remember, right? So when I plug this one into the switch, it will affect all of these elements. This left pillar stays as it is, and the right one is now affected by this plus x input. And since the straight walls here in the middle are getting overwritten essentially anyways a little bit later, we don't have to worry about those. That worked out, but we have to clearly switch around the true and the false values. So this is going to become 18 and this is going to become 17. And now, hey, we did it. Now we have a blank wall with a nice, well, asymmetrical corner that kind of works on both sides. Now, first thing you're going to realize that this is a rather badly tiled texture. And you can solve this problem either by working creatively in the shader editor, or you could create a couple of different straight wall pieces with little dirt decals or details or anything and randomize that input. I have decided this time to not randomize the parts all that much because I just find it frankly quite annoying with this entire switch setup. And until Blender is out in the alpha and maybe they have found a better way to do it, you can quite easily randomize a certain element by just going into search and look for random attribute or random value, I'm sorry. And there's this integer which you can set to arrange between, let's say you have 10 different wall parts and they start at index 19. So you type in a minimum of 19 and they end at index 24. And now you return a random value between 19 and 24 and plug it into whatever part you want to randomize. Let's say the straight wall, for example. As you can see, we now get random parts. Well, obviously I don't have the random parts set up, but that's the way you could do it. I will not do it yet because I wait for like a better collection-based solution where I essentially just create a single master collections and all the different parts are picked out of sub-collections, which doesn't work right now. Last time I showed you like a little thread that I made about this feature being implemented. I hope that the Blender devs read it at some point. You now know how it's working and you can customize it as much as you want. Now the other part that you might say is, well, this is a little bit of a hacky solution, right? Like a shoddy ass building you got there, like the windows don't even go all the way to the side. And yes, I know that. The thing is, that would mean that we had to create 1, 2, 3, 4 different blank edge corners that consist out half of whatever this floor type looks like and half of a blank wall. And then we had to distribute them using our masks. And I mean, I've showed you the way there, but doing it would take, well, I guess the better part of half an hour, and that's really, really boring already. So I will not do it, but I think I've equipped you with the tools to do it yourself if you really think this is necessary. I think this is like a good in-between solution because it's fast, it's efficient, and it doesn't look wrong, I think. You know, it's a little bit unusual perhaps. Now though, we still have to find a way to switch around this wall to other different sides of the buildings. Well, whenever I try to find out how to do something, I do something that I call the black box approach. And what is the black box approach? I will show you right now. I have this little sub node tree here and I feed 2 values into it, right? Plus x and plus x full. And I know that in order to get the other walls, I would have to feed in plus y and minus y full and all of these different parts. We have to build some logic that switches in between these little parts. And instead of thinking about how we do it right now in this big screen full of nodes, I'm just going to shift right click drag over these 2 nodes and create reroute nodes and control G to put them into a node group. Now I'll tab out of the node group and see if everything has worked. Let's go back into the node group. I will dissolve these two readroute nodes. They are a little bit annoying. Control X. I also don't like this crisscross situation, so just for cleanliness sake, I'll switch the outputs. Now the top input was plus X and the bottom one is plus X full. And we know that in order for this to kind of work, we also need inputs for all the other parts. So let me quickly create them. So now I've created an input for all of the groups that we're going to connect up. Note how I've changed the order of these inputs a little bit compared to how they come out of the walls. My thought is that if I want to switch through the different walls, I kind of want to do them in a rotating motion, like first of all this one, second of all this one, third of all this one, and last of all this one. Right now, plus X and minus X lay opposite of each other, so I kind of rearranged them. You will see what that means in a second. So let's quickly connect up all these new connections that I've made. Last of all, I will create another input, a last input, move it to the very top, and I'm going to switch it to integer, and I'm calling this selector. And maybe to see what we're doing, let's check out the output. So this one, the top value, is the one that goes into the corners. So I will rename the top value to corner switch, and the other one then wall switch. Now, the reason this is called a black box is because we have some inputs and we have some outputs, and in there, in this black box that we cannot look inside, some weird logic happens that makes it work, right? So this is like the entire idea. And now I have this kind of very isolated area where I can figure out how to do it. My idea was that I have this selector. When I set it to 0, essentially none of the walls are blank walls. If I set it to 1, for example, plus X could be the first one, will become a blank wall. When I set it to 2, it switches over to the next wall. When I set it over to 3, it becomes the next one. And lastly, when I set it to 4, the last wall will become blank. In the node group, I will make the selector minimum 0 and the maximum 4, so we cannot get outside of this value range. And obviously, we have to switch between these values somehow. So I'm going to get a switch node. I can set it to Boolean, which is obviously what we need because we are working with Boolean values. Sorry, I've heard someone in a tutorial say Boolean at one point, and it sounded so smart and sophisticated. I would have always called it Boolean. And since then I've adopted that, and then someone made fun in the comments in the last video, so fuck you. No, I'm trying to say Boolean now. I try to re-educate myself to my former glory. When I connected it, this full value went into the switch, which is a little bit stupid. So let's reconnect it to false, and let's put the y plus y full down to true. Now, I know for a fact that this is the plus y wall. So when I switch the switch, yes, as you can see, it works. Now, obviously only switch accepts a on and off Boolean value, but the only thing we have at our disposal is a integer, which is a number. However, a number can be translated into Boolean quite simply because when a number is set to 0, it is wrong, it is off, the switch is off. And if it is 1 or anything higher than 1, it will become true. Same thing goes for lower than 0. Everything lower than 0 will also be false. So it's essentially clamped between 0 and 1. Now, to prove that, I've just connected the selector to the switch, and now if I put this selector to 1, as you can see, the same thing happens as if I would have switched the switch by hand. Now, another concept I want to show you is if I take a utilities math node and set it to subtract, and subtract a value of 1 from this selector and plug it in here. Now, I've put in 0, but 1 gets subtracted. So at this point, this value will be minus 1 and will be essentially clamped to 0, which is off. If I increase it now to 1, and I type back in here, this 1 will yet again be subtracted and will be 0 now, and still the switch will remain off. But as soon as I switch over into territory of 2, well, now 2 minus 1 is 1, and now the switch is on. And when I surpass this value, as we said, it's clamped, so it doesn't matter how high I go. Once I reach the threshold of 1, this switch is on and it will not change. So these are the concepts that we are going to use to make this switch work, this kind of multi-switch. Let's not subtract something for now, and let's think about what we wanted. So when I have set it to 0, I want no wall to be blank. Well, that is rather easy. I will go to input, get myself a boolean, which is just a manual version, because if I disconnect these switches, you can see I don't have a value here that I can manually check. So I'm going to help myself by plugging in this boolean input. If this selector is set to 0, it would be false. So I can put something into false. Now, obviously, when I have the boolean checked, all the walls are blank, a situation that I do not like. So I'll have to switch it to off. I will have to take the tick away. Now, if it is 0, all the walls will be off. If it is 1, I will return the plus x full that we've previously discussed. So now 0, all walls off, 1, first wall is on. If I set it to 2, nothing will happen. So let's chain together a couple of switch nodes. So I will get a second switch node and I will plug this into the true value instead. And I will get this selector input and subtract 1 from it, right? And this value where we subtracted 1 goes into the switch now. So what is the situation currently now when we have the selector of 1? If we have a selector of 1, it means that this first switch node, which receives 1, will check the true input, which is the lower one. And then it will check this switch node, which has an input of 0 right now, because we've subtracted 1 minus 1, because we've calculated 1 minus 1. So the false input is the one that is active right now. So to the false input, I will now connect the x plus full. Now let's chain another switch and put it into the true value. Because now when I go to a selector of 2, this one still remains true because, as we said, it's clamped. So by now this is receiving a value of 2. It doesn't matter for this switch node, it will return true. Now this one will return a value of 1, which is also true, right? And now we can either subtract 2 or subtract 1 more. I mean, it's the same thing. 1 minus 1 is the same like minus 2, right? So, and I'll put it into this switch. So right now at this phase, as we said, true, true. And here we have false because we have 2 minus 2, so 0, which is false. And that all sounds really convoluted and stupid, but I hope you can follow. So now this is the next part that we're going to fill in. And now I'm going to raise it up to 3. And now we have to get another switch node, yet again connected to false. And the logic stays the same, so I'm not going to repeat it. Now we have to subtract yet another value from this. Now it's minus 3. I'm connecting it to the switch. So into false, I'm going to put the next wall. That worked. And now we don't have to duplicate another switch node because we only have one option left and we have one value left. So I'm going to connect this to true. And now if we go over and put this black box to 4, the last one will be selected. Now let's try it out again. 0, no walls active. 1, this one. 2, this one. 3, this one. 4, that one. Perfect, I'm happy with that. The only thing we have to do is to account for the corners as well, because right now we've only worked with this middle value. That's a little bit annoying, but not completely impossible. We just have to be a little bit careful and deliberate with what we do. So let's take these 4 nodes, including the Boolean value, and duplicate it. I'm moving it upwards. And this output is now going to go into the corner switch. Now comes the tedious part of looking very closely and switching the correct inputs. Now up here, where the minus y full is currently connected, I instead want to connect just the minus y. So let's try that out. Let's tab out of here. I'm also going to rename the node. I'm going to call it blank wall switch. And now let's see if the corners are working right. These 2 corners are working. Selector of 2. These 2 corners are working. All right. That was a lot of work, but that's how you can do it. There are other approaches as well, probably, that are maybe better or maybe worse. There are a lot of approaches that will definitely be a lot more work than this. And I hope this helps you to find your own way spread your wings and fly away and all of that. Of course, another thing we should do, I'm going to duplicate another one of our nice little group inputs right now, and I will create a new output here, a new input here, which I will call blank wall selector. This goes into our selector. And here as well, I want to set up a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 4. And now we can control this kind of stuff from our modifier tab. Great. Mark this down as a victory. And now we can almost end with the awnings that I've promised. One more thing that I saw in another comment is how one would go about to completely disable the ring and gap frequencies, and if we couldn't have like a switch that turns them off. And I will apply a similar logic as we did with the blank walls, as in if I turn it to 0, I want these things to be off. Right now, if I turn it to 0, every single part turns into a ring/gap. So that's not good. That's not what we want. This ring and gap frequency both go into this masks value, right? Let's tap in here and follow our little node logic here. This is the modulo value of depth that decides anything. However, if I would take an input node and set it again to Boolean, if you remember, and just replace what the modulo returns in here and just give it a value of true or false, you can see that we can practically overwrite the entire thing that comes out of the modulo. So instead of just plugging in the modulo straight away, we can switch it. Search for switch and set it to, I think in this case we should set it to float, because if I would set it to Boolean, well, this modulo would be clamped to only return 0 or 1. Well, actually that shouldn't even matter, right? Let me quickly try it out. All right, now you can set it to Boolean. That doesn't matter, obviously, because this modulo only returns 0 or 1. So let's take a look at our VGAP frequency and just plug it into the switch. Now, if the VGAP frequency is 0, I will just connect this Boolean up here into the false value, which will be triggered as soon as it is 0, and I'll set it to true, therefore overwriting this modulo value and turning the entire gap logic off completely, right? And as soon as I switch it over to 1, now this thing is active again and the modulo kicks in and everything works as before, right? Oh, that was the wrong value. Everything works as before, right? Now, we just have to do the same thing up here. And I mean, that's just an easy little duplication. Get a switch up here. The true input goes into the modulo. Well, the modulo goes into the true input and the Boolean goes into the false input. And now we put the switch instead of the VGAP frequency into the ring frequency, right? Okay, now ring frequency, let's test it out. If I set it to 0, I can't set it to 0 because I have limited like the numbers I can plug in there. Let's go into the tools menu. We have to tap out of the masks thing for that and look for the rings frequency with a minimum of 0 actually. Okay, let's put in 0. Et voila, it didn't work at all. And upon further investigation, I've just realized that I was stupid and I actually didn't plug it into the ring frequency because that is up here. But as you remember, we did the vertical gaps on 2 axes and this is actually the other input for our vertical gaps. So, I mean, we still had to do this kind of logic, but instead of plugging the switch into the rings, we should have also put it into the gap frequency, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked on the other axis. Let's make it a little bit wider and check out if it now works on both axes. Yes, okay. And now, last try. In order to fix up the rings, let's duplicate the switch and the Boolean value and bring it up here. And now, let's try it again. Into the switch input goes the ring frequency, and into the true input goes the modulo. The false input remains the Boolean. And let's try it out. Ring frequency set to 0. Now it's off. Yet another commenter is hopefully very happy, ecstatic right now. Okay, finally, let's talk about the awnings and get this thing done. Last little bit of chaos now for our node tree, but then we can finally bury it. So let's start by duplicating this instance on points node. I'll make 2 duplications of it, one for each detail that we will add. We only have 2 awnings, but you can put details in the same manner on other parts of the buildings too. If I Control Shift right click drag, very complicated command here, I can automatically create a join geometry node, given that I have Node Wrangler enabled. Now up here, these 2 instance index input I want to clear, so I will disconnect these instance index values. And instead, I will just search plainly for a integer and connect it up. Well, I know that one awning is 19, which is for the middle floor, and the other one is 20. So integer 19 goes into the upper one or the lower one, whatever you prefer, and 20 goes into the other one. Right. Now, we do have awnings. We have quite a lot of awnings, a few too many, if you ask me. In order to differentiate where which awning goes, we will have to either plug something into the selection input, or we have to limit what goes into the points input. I'm going to do the latter, so I will search for separate geometry, which by default is set to point, so I can separate a group of points into 2 little groups, and the other group kind of dissolves into nothingness. Then it's like applying a mask or a filter. We can put something into selection here. Now, this is the part that is yet again a little bit annoying. First of all, let me duplicate this selection node and put it down here. I know that the lower instance on point nodes is the upper floor, which will be a bit easier. So let's start with that. So we obviously do have a selection here, which we could plug right up to this upper floor mask that we have prepared. Yeah, let's maybe mute the other nodes for a moment here so we can see what's going on. Now, as you can see, that almost worked, right? That is already pretty good. Let me quickly digress for a small second here. The secret on how it works is actually based on how I modeled it. If we take a look at this upper floor, I have modeled the awning that it already perfectly fits in positioning. This is a separate object, but if we take a look here at the orange origin point, then you can see that they share the same origin point. They lie on the same origin point, which means that as soon as we put both objects on the same point, automatically this awning has to fit where the window is. If your awning would have an offset, maybe, let's say in edit mode, I've move it over like a bit, make it a little bit unclean, and I unhide the building. Now we can see that all these awnings too have a very unpleasant offset. So let me Control Z it to its original state. Obvious problem, we have not cared about the roof part of our model when we created the mask for the upper floor, because we have overwritten the parts of the model that would become the roof later on anyway, so we didn't have to bother back then. Right now it's coming to bite us in the back a little bit, because now all the roof parts have awnings on them as well. So I fear we do have to do a little bit more Boolean math. It's not going to be complicated, it's just again be more nodes that add to this terrible salad of noodles that is making everything so visually unappealing and very hard to see through. And if you say that this is chaos, you're right, it's chaos for me as well. If I clean it up right now though, it looks different between each part, so I really don't want to do this. So you have some point of reference at least. Okay, now Boolean math, I'll mute it again. So we know that we have the upper floors connected already, this is good. And we need to have this roof and do some kind of Boolean operation with it. So let's unmute it and just straight up look for the roof. There it is, roof edge is what I called it. And Boolean math looks for an intersection, something that both sets of inputs share. So the upper floor had all of these points, including this up there, and the roof edge has all of these points up there. And since they both only share those roof points, now it, well, returns those. The exact opposite of what we need, honestly. So let's duplicate this end node and plug it in between here where the roof edge input goes and set it to not. And now we'll only look at an intersection of all the parts that are not the roof and the upper floor. Sounds a little complicated, but that's Boolean math for you, right? So you would now say, great, we're finished, we're done, it works, until I turn back on the gap frequency, both of them, the rings and the gaps. Oh, the rings don't matter here yet. They will only become a problem later on when we work on the middle floors. However, you can see like awnings shouldn't be there, right? We also have to exclude those vertical gaps. This is luckily not that difficult. You remember and is like an intersection, while or is more like an and in the traditional way, which is we can group things together. So we can say everything that is not the roof or not the vertical gap will be excluded. So the vertical gaps are gone now. And you may not see it from this side, but on this side it was, no, it wasn't visible. Ha, I've tricked myself here. The corners right now will also accept awnings. We just can't see it because there's like a virtual non-existent vertical gap over here, which we can't see because it was replaced by the corner. But as soon as I change the scale of the building a little bit, you will see that I'm absolutely baffled and astonished. And apparently, no, we apparently already fixed it. Hey, that's good. Less steps to work with. I won't think about why that worked right now. There's a very logical reason probably, but hey, why bother if it works, right? Don't change the running system. So good. These 3 nodes enabled us to put the awnings where I want to. Now, one last thing. Let's put another OR node into the chain right here. And realize now that if I check this Boolean, I can disable all of them at once. So this Boolean input is kind of like a little sneaky way into the system where I can disable individual awnings now. And let's search for this random value node that we had before. And you can set it to Boolean. And there's a probability slider. Great, exactly what we need. Put it into the Boolean value. And now, wow, you can randomly select and deselect awnings. Isn't that amazing? All right, perfect. The thing that is a little bit annoying though is like a probability value of 1 disables all the awnings. That's not really intuitive, right? So we can change that up though. So let's go into the group input and create a new output. Actually, instead of pressing the plus button, I will this time connect the value directly, because then I get this nice cool little slider down here as well, which I like. And I'm going to connect it 2 times because I need another slider later on for the middle floor awnings. So, you know, work smart, not hard or whatever. I think upper floor awnings and lower floor awnings is probably better. So now we have to invert this value. So when it is 1, it should be 0. And when it is 0, it should be 1. So let's add a math node. There are probably many ways to do it. I'm going to change it to a subtraction, and I will subtract our slider, from a value of 1 and connect this to the probability. And now if I put it to 0, 1 minus 0 is 1, so it's the opposite. And if I put it to 1, 1 minus 1 is 0. So, you know, flipped it for ya. Now let's do the same thing for the lower floors. And here begins the pain, because we do not actually have a mask output for the lower floors. So you might think, oh, let's just do the same thing again. And we look down here and there are no lower floors. And remember, there are no lower floors because previously the lower floors were the only thing left by principle of exclusion. I'm going to do it inside of this masks node so it's not completely polluted here. So go into the masks node, add a new output, which I will call lower floors, or well, middle floor, I think I called them middle floor or middle floors. I will use this middle floor value and we will do a little trick that we haven't seen in a long time, which is use this selection as some kind of preview right now. Okay, so now I can see which values I select at the end of the day. So since we are not able to select the middle floor, we have to select everything that is not the middle floor and invert it at the end. And that is simple. It's just a little bit convoluted. So I'm taking an OR node, putting it into this middle floor filter. Okay, and now, you know what? Let's just shift drag over this entire thing here so we can get some inputs right here that are a little bit more accessible. So the middle floor is not the corners. We don't want the corners in our selection. The middle floor is not the upper floor. So we don't want the upper floor in our selection. The middle floor is not the ring. We don't want awnings on our ring. The middle floor is also not. What do we have left that we want to exclude? The vertical gaps. The middle floor is also not the vertical gaps, right? And I say a lot of right today. I have words that I tend to repeat a lot between parts. Usually it's essentially. I say essentially a lot, and now right. I have to really monitor my speech carefully with you nitpicking assholes. Yeah, I think we have everything. Now the only thing left to do is just invert this selection. So duplicate that last node, set it to not. And ta-da, we've selected all the middle floors. Now let's tap out of here and contemplate what we have done. And yeah, now we just have to take this middle floor and why is it already connected? Have I already? Oh no, it's connected to the selection currently. Now we just can put it into this selection up here in the separate geometry. Now let's cut this connection again so our original building returns. Let's not forget to reconnect the bottom middle. That's the mistake I made last time. And why exactly? Oh, since I've muted this node, it's just feeding the original cube that we construct the building out of here. Don't worry, as soon as I unmute this part, it should reappear. And the awnings have appeared where they should appear. I could have easily put them on the corners. I want to have the potential later on to maybe make a corner that doesn't have windows, maybe like a big pillar or something very artistic, maybe like ghouls and goblins and whatnot. So I didn't want awnings in my corner, but you can put them there. I don't care. I'm not judging. Now, lastly, we still have to do this same percentage logic. So let's go and duplicate these couple of nodes here. To be precise, the subtract node, the Boolean node, and the OR node. Duplicate them over here. Switch the input from upper awnings to lower awnings. Switch the upper Boolean value from our selector for the upper floors to the middle floors. And now let's replace this Boolean value that we are feeding right now up there. We have to switch this node over to AND instead of OR. Actually, let's get rid of this node. There is no reason why we shouldn't plug it directly into selection. There are no awnings appearing on the bottom floor. So let's do the same here. Yes, okay, that worked. So we can get rid of these two separate geometry nodes. I don't know why I put them there. That was stupid. Okay. So I think we are done here. Now, first of all, I feel kind of exhausted. Second of all, there are a lot of things that you can do to make this better. You can model a lot of more parts for the roof, that you have some chimneys there. You can create AC units. Right now, also the proportions in this case are rather wrong because this type of brick industrial building wouldn't really look like this with this combination of assets and this size. Oh, by the way, I've just realized that the lower floor awnings do not have to be inverted. Wow, that was embarrassing. I was already halfway through my closing speech here. And even more embarrassing is that future Kammerbild had to get out of bed because he suddenly remembered another blunder he did. Well, we didn't account for our blank walls. It's an easy fix, yet I still had to get out of bed to re-record it, which pisses me off. Alright, these two OR chains here connect together all the parts that we exclude from the top wall. So I'll just duplicate another OR node, plug it in some arbitrary position and just get the output of our wall switch here. Wonderful. Now the blank wall is excluded here. And now we have to do another OR selector here in this AND node. And I'm going to connect the same output here, wall switch. Now, as you see, more awnings have appeared because we have not inverted this selection like we did here, because we need the opposite of this OR calculation. Now it disappeared, and now the inversion of our value here makes sense because, well, now it's no longer inverted because we put a not in here. So double inversion equals everything being all right again. Yeah, that's a little addendum. Now back to past me. I think a very good approach to making a city scene with them is to make multiple smaller buildings and kind of intersecting them. The possibilities are pretty big. It really depends on what parts you do. I will create a couple more sets for you to experiment around and put them on Gumroad maybe or something, so we not only have this industrial brick building, but perhaps some other cool assets as well. Oh, I don't know how much I will edit this one. Maybe the amount of motion graphics has decreased in this last part because I'm really exhausted. I have really spent the last 2 weeks doing nothing but watching television regarding Ukraine, and I have been I think it's healthy now that I can get a little bit distance to this building generator. I have a couple other cool ideas. You know what? For those two who stick around, I know I can see how many of you click off the videos, you know, you can't fool me. So as a little added bonus for all of you, we can take a look at the spontaneous idea that I had. I thought a geometry nodes ocean, you know, like a more cooler version of the ocean modifier, just with GeoNode, that would be cool. Like a cool fence wall generator, like based on curves that you can maybe draw or make a curve to create a wall. That would be cool, I guess. Geometry nodes cables, I have actually done the big mistake that you shouldn't do as a YouTube tutorial maker, and actually looked on YouTube for a similar tutorial, and someone has done a very good job with that, so that's probably off the table. That's the stupid thing. Everyone has done every tutorial already, so you can't really rely on being the first one who does something. So really, if you want to make tutorials on YouTube, don't look at other channels, otherwise you can't ever do anything. There's this kind of node setup that is floating around on Twitter sometimes with the dude who's making those cool tubes. I don't know if there's a tutorial on YouTube, but I could make one. Why not? I thought about a shader, a caustic shader, you know, like the water reflections essentially. That shouldn't be too hard, right? It's essentially just Voronoi, I think. Maybe we can do a cool underwater scene. This is a project that I cannot do myself yet, but I'm learning. I'm not learning, I'm lying. I will learn, hopefully, a little bit more about like normal displacement and parallax displacement, all of that stuff, because I would like to have a window shader that is just working based upon an image texture and that doesn't require me to actually model out the inside of a building. That would go really well with the building generator. But I don't know how it works yet, and I don't even know if I'm smart enough to learn it. And here I just wrote Bézier. I don't know why I wrote that down, honestly. But it's there. If you want a tutorial, hit me up. I had a couple other ideas, but I forgot them by the time I opened this great document, this detailed documentation of my ideas. If you have more ideas what you would like to see, if it's in my power, I will do it. I still have leaf generation open for the trees, right? I did a tutorial on a tree, but it didn't have leaves, so that is still open. I've also had a cool landscape shader lined up. I mean, that's a little bit of an old story right now. Many people have done landscape shaders, but I wanted to do my own because, hey, I'm a selfish kind of guy. If I can get myself a landscape shader, I'll do it, right? A little bit automatic hill and mountain detection, that would be fine. I'm done. Honestly, I don't know if you can hear it. I'm done. I think I'll quit for today. This was a little bit unfortunate because I actually felt pressure to finish this tutorial series, which shows me that it was too long because I don't want to do YouTube because I feel pressured. But to be fair, I already did 5 parts, and it would be a little bit mean to just not do the last part. So, you know, I closed my eyes and I've gone through it. Do you say that in English? I bit the bullet, I guess, is the more appropriate expression. Well, now, enough rambling. Have a good evening, and until next time.